Everyone knows the saying, never invade Russia in winter. Napoleon tried, Hitler tried. Both froze on the same endless plains. But in 1237, an army rode in from the east, looked at the snow, and chose winter on purpose, and won. This is not their story. This is the story of the people who were supposed to be unbeatable in the cold, and weren't. Because the real question isn't, how were the Mongols so good at winter? You saw that in the first episode. The real question is much darker. What was wrong with Russia's system that winter? Its greatest strength became the perfect weapon against it. A century before the Mongols came, the lands of the Rus were already built around one basic fact of life. Winter was long, brutal, and inescapable. The solution was not to outrun it. It was to dig in. Picture a winter night in Vladimir. Snow lies deep over the fields outside the walls. The Klyazma River is a sheet of white ice running past the city, hard and silent. Inside the walls, the city hums. A merchant drags a fur-loaded sled through the main gate. He's come down the frozen river from a village upstream. The prince's men check his cargo and take their cut. Smoke rises from every chimney. Granaries are full. Wells are deep enough to last through months of snow. On nights like this, the system feels unshakable. And Vladimir is not unique. Across the plains, Rus's princes rule from fortified towns called gords, citadel cities ringed with earth ramparts, timber palisades several meters high, and defensive ditches that can hold water in warm seasons. In winter, frozen ground makes the embankments even more solid underfoot. Inside each gord sits a complete winter survival infrastructure. Storehouses of grain and dried fish, workshops, churches, wells. These towns are designed to outlast isolation. The whole economy leans on rivers. In summer, the Dnieper, Volga, Oka, and countless tributaries are commercial arteries, carrying furs, wax, and grain between forest towns and distant markets. In winter, those rivers freeze, but that is part of the design. Ice turns waterways into seasonal roads. Sleds replace boats. Messengers and traders still move. The network never completely shuts down. The military system matches this settled, river-connected world. Rus's forces center on the druzhina, the prince's armored retainers and heavy infantry, backed by militia from the towns. When danger looms, the doctrine is simple. Pull inside the gord, shut the gates, and let stores and strong walls outlast the enemy. Over this sits a political map that appears stable. Kiev, Vladimir Suzdal, Ryazan, Chernigov, Novgorod. Each principality has its own prince, its own gord, its own slice of river network. To people living inside this system, it feels safe. Strong walls, full storehouses, rivers that turn into winter highways, a way of war built to hold until spring. On paper, Russia looks winter-proof. On paper. But in the winter of 1237, this system meets an enemy whose entire way of life is built around moving through winter, not hunkering down inside it. What looked like strength in peacetime turns out to be 4 fatal flaws. For the Rus, rivers are arteries of trade, communication, and defense. A wide river between you and an enemy feels like a moat, stretching from horizon to horizon. So they build along them. Ryazan on the Oka, Kolomna on the Moscow, and Oka, Moscow on tributaries, Vladimir on the Klyazma, power clusters on riverbanks, because trade does. Which means that in winter, when the water freezes solid, almost every major city in northeastern Rus is joined by a flat, treeless band of ice aimed straight at its walls. From the Rus' viewpoint, those winter rivers tie their world together. From an invader's viewpoint, they are ready-made highways. You don't need to guess where the cities are. You just follow the frozen water. The geography that had protected Rus for generations becomes, in one campaign season, the invasion map. Those timber gords are designed to survive long sieges by neighboring princes, rivals with small retinues, limited siege gear. Every side expects that after a few weeks someone will negotiate or withdraw. Against an army that arrives with trained engineers, serious siege engines, and a readiness to burn cities that won't submit, wooden walls are not protection. They are fuel. Winter helps the attackers in ways the defenders never had to consider. Frozen moats and ditches are no longer obstacles. They are solid ground. Snow-packed slopes can be climbed. Defenders struggle to move and fight in deep drifts on the glacis. The fortress that gives a prince confidence in peacetime becomes a trap in war. You cannot outrun the enemy. They move faster across the landscape than you do. You cannot hide. Your city is exactly where the rivers say it is. You cannot bet on outlasting a siege. Your walls burn. The Rus' way of war fits their world. Armored retainers fighting at close quarters on walls and in narrow streets, militia backing them in defense of their own town. Against neighboring principalities who use similar methods, this works. But it rests on a quiet assumption that winter makes large-scale offensive campaigning impossible. That deep snow and frozen ground will keep any serious army home. In 1237 to 1238, that assumption breaks. When Rus's forces do leave their walls to confront the invader in open terrain, they find themselves facing mounted archers on open snow and frozen ground. Heavy infantry is slow. Local contingents are scattered. It is hard to concentrate forces before the enemy is somewhere else. The Rus' military is optimized for sheltering through winter at home. Their opponent is comfortable operating in winter over long distances. That is not a small difference. It is a difference in kind. Winter, which the Rus' elite expect to favor defenders, instead amplifies every advantage of a mobile cavalry army. All of these flaws, rivers, forts, doctrine, might still be survivable if there is a single center that can coordinate a response. There isn't. By the early 13th century, Kievan Rus has fractured into a patchwork of rival principalities. Each prince controls his own gord, his own river stretch, his own druzhina. They compete for trade. They raid each other's lands. They have even fought over Kiev itself. So when Batu's forces cross into Ryazan's territory in late 1237, the local prince sends urgent appeals to his neighbors. Vladimir is the strongest power in the northeast. Help does not arrive in time. And here is the deepest twist in the system. The very rivers that carry envoys and messages between principalities in peacetime are now the same frozen routes the invaders are using. And the invaders are faster. Each prince falls back on the only strategy he fully controls. Defend his own walls, protect his own family, hope the storm passes elsewhere. The result is not a united defense. The result is a series of isolated sieges. The political map that made sense in slow regional conflicts becomes a death sentence once an enemy can cross whole principalities in days. So what does this look like from inside the system as it fails? It begins in Ryazan, December 1237. The city has done everything by the book. Walls manned, stores laid in. The moat is frozen, but no one has ever seen a major steppe army campaigning this deep into winter. On a pale morning, sentries on the southern rampart see movement on the ice of the Oka. At first it looks like distant dark dots. Riders. Then more. Lines of them. Then a sound, low, rhythmic, the ice carrying it from far away. Hooves, thousands of them. Not a raid, not a scout party. An army moving in ordered ranks along the frozen river. In December, Ryazan's prince sends riders out along the only routes that matter. Up the rivers, over the ice. To Vladimir, to other neighbors. The message is simple. Enemies in strength, in winter. No large relief force appears before the siege begins. The city holds only days. Men on the walls face barrages of missiles and machines they have never seen used against their timber defenses. Fires take hold. Once the walls are breached, the fighting turns into slaughter in streets built for markets, not war. Later chroniclers describe the ruin bluntly: the city burned, its people killed or carried off. The detail collapses into a single, numbed description. For those who escape and flee north along the same frozen rivers, the message they carry is sharper. What everyone trusted did not work. News reaches Grand Prince Yuri II in Vladimir. Ryazan has fallen, fast. The enemy is coming up the river routes. He faces a choice that would have made sense in earlier wars: stay in Vladimir and prepare to withstand a siege, or move out to gather forces from other towns, hoping to assemble an army strong enough to strike back. He leaves a garrison and part of his family in Vladimir and rides north with what men he can gather, looking for reinforcements and better ground. It is a gamble based on the old rhythm of warfare: sieges that last, delays that matter. In early 1238, Vladimir falls after a short, violent siege. Fire does in days what hunger used to do in months. The city is devastated, the leading family killed as the main church burns around them. By the time Yuri's camp on the Sit River learns what has happened, if it learns at all, Vladimir is already gone. On the banks of the Sit River, early March 1238, Yuri's camp is what passes for a central force in northeastern Rus. It is small. The men are tired. They are waiting for reinforcements that are crawling over frozen roads, if they are coming at all. The prince has sent messengers in every direction, along the same river routes that once carried trade and aid. And days later there is still no sign of answering banners on the horizon. In a world where help used to come slowly but predictably, the silence is its own warning. Either the letters never arrived, or the cities that should have answered are already fighting for themselves or already gone. Then the alarm. Riders spotted at a distance, then nearer, then on multiple approaches. The enemy has found the camp the same way it found every city, following the frozen waterways and winter tracks more quickly than messages can move. There is little time to form ranks. The clash is sharp, confused, and one-sided. In the aftermath, the Grand Prince is dead. So are many of the men who might have led a wider defense. For people in the surrounding lands, there is no more field army somewhere out there to rally behind. There are only their own walls, their own supplies, their own decisions. Organized resistance in the northeast does not end because every town falls at once. It ends because the network meant to connect and coordinate them has been progressively cut and turned against them. Flaw by flaw, piece by piece. The winter of 1237 to 1238 breaks northeastern Russes in months. The full cost plays out over centuries. The conquerors do not replace every prince with their own officials. They do not need to. Instead, they create what later generations call the Tatar-Mongol yoke, a system where Rus's princes keep their titles and cities, but pay tribute and accept outside oversight. If tribute and obedience falter, armed expeditions return, sometimes again in winter. For roughly 2.5 centuries, that is the reality. Native rulers at home, but with obligations to a steppe power beyond their borders. And during those centuries, one small principality adapts especially well: Moscow. While some princes resist and are punished or sidelined, Moscow's rulers learn to operate within the horde's framework, collecting tribute, mediating disputes, building favor, and gradually pulling more neighboring lands under their control. The yoke does not just punish an old flaw, it forces a new system to grow. The fragmented, river-bound, fortress-focused order that failed so quickly in 1237 is slowly replaced by something more centralized and coordinated, a state that can speak with one voice more often, and eventually field forces that move more flexibly across its own vast space. The flaw that Winter exposed takes generations to repair. When Rus's lands finally stand more independently again, the political and military structure that emerges looks very different from the patchwork of wooden gords that burned in the snow. It looks like the early shape of an empire. You've just seen what broke. If you want to see what the Mongols built, the system of tribute, control, and long-distance power that reshaped Rus's politics from the inside for generations. That story is coming next. And if you haven't seen how the Mongols engineered the winter capability that cracked this system open, that's the first episode. It's right here.